I absolutely believe that the weighted student staffing is a step in the right direction, because I think when you, just speaking from a teaching experience and administrative experience, as I see students walking into our classrooms consistently in low-income communities, 2 to 3 grade levels behind their peers in more affluent communities, that happens every single year. We know it happens, and we have to address it. There's 2 things we could do, and I see this happening all across the board. Is you have one choice: is you can point fingers. You can say, well, I'm going to blame the teachers before me because they didn't teach them. I'm going to blame the parents. I'm going to blame the community. I'm going to blame the student themselves. I'm going to blame the district leadership. I'm going to blame everybody else, and we don't take responsibility. What I see the most successful teachers do, and when I see the real bright spots across our community, is when teachers, principals, instead of pointing fingers, they point thumbs. And they say, what can I do to affect the situation? That's when you see teachers becoming counselors, guidance counselors, social workers, nurses, surrogate parents, and teachers on top of everything. And so when we know that there is a Herculean effort every single year undertaken by teachers to overcome the cyclical natures of poverty and closing the academic achievement gap, right? And in order to do that year in and year out, it requires so much professional development and support that we don't necessarily give our teachers. And I think in order to ensure that we're doing everything we can to support teachers to undertake that task, I think we absolutely have to provide more and additional resources to communities where we know teachers have that much more work to do.
Does that mean that you wouldn't change anything, or that you would redesignate the funds and do what?
No, absolutely. So if you were to say, I think that the weighted student staffing is absolutely in the right direction, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what it would be even more specific is if we were to able to say, okay, which specific programs do we have working in our most underserved communities, and say, what's working the best, right? And if we could find out what's working the best, we need to absolutely fully fund those programs and ensure that they're in every single school, no matter what the cost. And I think that if we're able to say, if we can point to what works for kids and ensure that we're spending our money on what works for kids, that's going to yield the best outcomes at the end of the day, as opposed to necessarily providing a blanket amount.
Did I hear you say no matter what the cost?
I think we have to have a mentality that says we're going to do whatever it takes to ensure that all kids are learning. I firmly believe that there should absolutely be no case where students don't have access to the kind of technology, to resources, to desks, to simple materials in their schools. And I still hear stories of teachers in our under-resourced schools of lacking some of the basic resources in order to do their job. When I hear stories of folks complaining over at high schools that there's one copier to be used for the entire high school staff, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And as I walk from building to building, I have not seen that the case in other buildings. So I think there absolutely has to be a line where we say there can't be an under-resourced school just because it's absolutely inappropriate for teachers to be able to do their job. And if we really are committed to students getting what they need to succeed, then we need to ensure that teachers and principals are getting what they need to succeed. On the flip side of that question, so I think if we had a measurement to ensure that resources were adequately provided to every single school, I think that absolutely needs to happen. The second piece of like a checkbox necessarily for human beings, right? I think that's a lot harder of a situation. But I think we have to figure out a way to ensure that our schools all have a mix of incredibly highly effective teachers, whether they be brand new teachers who bring all the enthusiasm and hard work and are achieving results with kids, whether they're the 30-year veterans who bring a huge skill set and a ton of experience and are able to have results with kids. If someone's going to have results with kids, we want them in our buildings who are going to do right across the board. And I think when we talk to principals, and as I spoke to principals all across the district, they would absolutely say over and over again that they would love that mix of highly, having highly effective teachers, period, but having a great mix of staff members who come from all levels of experience who are going to bring different things to the table. So I think if we were going to say every teacher has to have 10 years of experience, that's going to be a difficult checkbox to cross off, right? If every teacher has to have national board certification, that's going to be a difficult thing to do. But I think we need to give principals also the flexibility in order to determine who they want to have in their buildings as well. As long as at the end of the day it's going to provide results for kids.
Basically the question is, how would you get that type of mix into schools? Or how would you assure that, or how would you even know what was happening?
Yeah.
As a board member with 150 plus schools.
Yeah, I think that the strategic staffing is a good step in the right direction where we're providing incentives, and I think we need to take that a step further and ensure that, that if it makes sense, if we have the right personnel and we have the right people in place who are achieving results with kids, we want them all across the district, And I think at at the end of the day, that's what strategic staffing is set up to do. But I don't know if there's a perfect combination of teachers, but I think we're all human beings, right? And as educators, it's going to be up to that principal to hire, to fire, to let go of teachers that do a great job in their building and not a great job in the building. And to take that kind of power away from a manager in a room kind of takes away their leadership.
But if I'm a principal and those more experienced, successful teachers are not coming to me, are not being sent to me,
Yeah.
that's the issue as a board, from the board level.
Absolutely, and I think I talked to Judy Fall, and she would talk at Irwin Avenue about how she would go to school fairs, or to teacher job fairs, and there would be huge lines next to a lot of schools across the district, and then she would look, and there would be one person, maybe two people standing in line for her school. And we absolutely have to change that across the board, and I think when we look at the difficulty of a teacher to take a student who comes in 2 to 3 grade levels behind and to bring them to grade level, versus a teacher who gets somebody who comes in on grade level to teach where they need to go. There's 2 different jobs that need to be done, right? And I think when we provide a teacher with the right professional development and support to do their jobs, they feel successful and they stay. So for example, I taught 7th grade science, right? I was given a 7th grade book, a 7th grade standard course of study, and a 7th grade pacing guide. But my students all came in reading on a 4th and 5th grade level. So that support was not effective for me. I needed to recreate my long-term plan and establish reading materials all the way from a 4th grade level and work my kids all the way up to the 7th grade level by the end of the year. That was not professional development support that was given to me. I had to come with it on my own. That made my job of teaching in my classroom more difficult than someone who would have walked in with all of their kids reading on a 7th grade level to start the year. They could have used every single one of those little pieces of professional development support to the best of their abilities. Now that completely changes how that person feels supported in their school and how willing they are to stay in their school versus how I felt supported in my school and how willing I was to stay in my school. And that ability to feel successful and supported is really what makes teachers want to stay in the classroom. And I think if we can provide that same level of professional development support to our teachers in the most difficult schools, we're going to see a brand new outlook on teaching in our most difficult schools.
We're going to be able to attain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.